In the rugged northern fringes of Scandinavia, where the land surrenders to the icy embrace of the Norwegian Sea, lives a people whose story has seldom been told. They're the Sea Sámi, or Sea in Norwegian, coastal cousins of the better-known reindeer-herding Sámi of the tundra. While the world may recognize the iconic image of Sámi in colorful gakti guiding reindeer through snow-laden plains, fewer know about those who live by the sea. For centuries, the Sea Sámi survived not on herds but on harpoons, nets, and hand-built boats. They were fishermen, seal hunters, boat makers, and coastal farmers, living in isolated hamlets tucked between soaring cliffs and Arctic waters. The Sea Sámi's story begins long before the rise of nations. As early as the first millennium AD, they occupied the shores of modern-day Norway and parts of Sweden and Finland. Their homes were built from sod and timber. Their boats were stitched from local pine and birch. They relied on salmon, cod, seal meat, and seabirds to endure brutal winters. Unlike their inland relatives, who followed migratory patterns, the Sea Sámi were rooted in place, deeply connected to the waters that both sustained and threatened them. They developed rich oral traditions, spiritual beliefs tied to sea creatures, and songs that echoed the waves. But their culture was slowly engulfed by colonization, forced assimilation, and silence. This series pulls back the curtain on the Sea Sámi's vanishing way of life. We'll explore how they lived, what they believed, and how their identity was nearly erased from history. The Sea Sámi worldview was shaped by the tides, the weather, and the wild sea. Their spiritual lives were deeply animistic. Just as the Tundra Sámi believed in the power of nature's spirits, the Sea Sámi viewed the sea as alive, with moods, needs, and vengeance. They believed in a sea spirit known as Radian, an invisible power that governed the ocean's generosity. Before setting out on fishing expeditions, they offered thanks with whispered prayers or small tokens cast into the waves. A smooth stone, a carved figure, a few drops of blood. Storms were not just meteorological events. They were warnings. If you disrespected the sea or took more than your share, you might not return. Their shamans, or noedas, could interpret dreams and read behavior of birds and waves. The noedas also guided souls of the dead, especially those lost at sea, ensuring they wouldn't become angry spirits. The shoreline to the Sea Sámi was a thin veil between this world and the next. Sacred drums were used to reach altered states of consciousness and connect with the spirit realm. These drums were circular, made of reindeer hide, and painted with symbols of boats, fish, birds, and human figures. Christian missionaries, horrified by these practices, destroyed hundreds of such drums. The Sea Sámi's rituals faded as Christianity tightened its grip. Churches were built along the coast, and the old beliefs were branded heretical. But echoes of them remain, in whispered lullabies and sea shanties passed down in secret. The Sea Sámi lived on a knife's edge, between freezing gales and fish-rich waters, between survival and starvation. They carved their livelihoods from the sea, using hand-woven nets and oar-powered boats to catch cod, herring, and halibut. Fishing was not just an occupation. It was a lifeline. Every family had its rhythms, dictated by the seasons and the migrations of fish. In summer, they cast long lines from midnight sunlit shores. In winter, they braved ice-covered fjords, sometimes cutting holes in the ice to catch what they could. Sea Sámi women were skilled at net mending, drying fish, and preparing seaweed and herbs for both food and medicine. They also tended gardens where root vegetables grew slowly in the stony soil. Nothing was wasted. Fish guts were used to make glue or feed dogs. Seal skin became boots. Bones became tools. Boats were sacred, passed down through generations. They were light enough to carry onshore, but sturdy enough to ride crashing waves. Boat building was a communal art. Every man knew how to carve, bend, and stitch the timbers. Trade was modest. Sea Sámi bartered fish and seal products with inland Sámi for furs and dried meat, or with Norwegian for salt and grain. But they were often cheated or taxed unfairly by local traders. Their homes were modest sod houses, partially dug into the earth for warmth. Fires crackled in the center, and smoke exited through holes in the roof. They shared stories of sea monsters, lost ships, and great catches around those hearths, keeping their culture alive through storytelling. Language is more than communication. It's the soul of a people. And for the Sea Sámi, their language once flowed like the fjords they called home. Variants of North Sámi, Skot Sámi, and Kilden Sámi were spoken in these coastal communities, laced with unique nautical terms and idioms reflecting their deep connection to the sea. Sea Sámi dialects held special words for the different kinds of waves, fish, and winds. There were terms for ice that floats silently, birds that signal storms, and the exact shade of green a fjord turns before a squall. These were not just poetic expressions. They were tools for survival. But with colonization came silence. Beginning in the 18th and 19th centuries, Norwegian authorities launched a campaign of Norwegianization, aiming to erase Sámi culture and language. Children were forbidden to speak Sámi in schools. Many were punished or shamed. Parents, hoping to protect their children from discrimination, stopped teaching the language at home. By the early 20th century, large portions of the Sea Sámi population had lost their native tongues. They became culturally Sámi but linguistically Norwegian, cut off from ancestral knowledge hidden in the structure of their own language. Today, a few elders still remember fragments. And in recent years, there's been a slow but passionate revival. Language Nest community classes and online initiatives are trying to bring the sea words back from the brink, because to speak a language again is to reclaim the stories it holds. The Sea Sámi lived in a world that, while remote, was never isolated. Their fjords saw not just fish but Vikings, traders, and foreign ships. In fact, historical records and genetic studies suggest a long-standing interaction, sometimes peaceful, sometimes violent, between the Sámi and Norse peoples. The Norse sagas refer to the Finns, a term they use for Sámi, as mystical and powerful, often consulting them as seers. But they also exploited them, taxed them, and in some cases enslaved them. The Sea Sámi were particularly vulnerable due to their accessible coastal locations. Interestingly, some Sámi became skilled boat builders and sailors for Norse chieftains. There are even oral traditions suggesting that a few Sámi families joined Viking expeditions as navigators, translators, or wives. This blending of cultures may help explain why descendants of Sea Sámi exist in places like Scotland, Russia, and even North America. One remarkable footnote in history. In the 1800s, Sámi reindeer herders were brought to Alaska by the U.S. government to teach Native Americans sustainable herding techniques. Among them were coastal Sámi with both mountain and sea skills, linking the Arctic cultures of Europe and North America in ways few imagine today. As the 19th century wore on, the Sea Sámi faced something far more insidious than storms: erasure. Under the policies of Norwegianization, the Sea Sámi were systematically stripped of their identity. Norwegian officials and clergy considered them less civilized and sought to integrate them by force. Schools banned Sámi languages. Churches preached against Sámi paganism. Officials redrew maps, replacing Sámi place names with Norwegian ones. Many Sea Sámi families, facing stigma and poverty, hid their identity. They changed surnames, stopped wearing traditional clothing. Some even claimed they were ethnic Norwegians or Finns. By the early 20th century, a large portion of the Sea Sámi population had been assimilated, at least on the surface. Census records often label them simply as coastal Norwegians. Sámi cultural markers disappeared from public view. Traditions were kept secret or lost entirely. This silence lasted for decades. Generations grew up unaware of their heritage. It wasn't until the cultural reawakening of the 1970s and 1980s that descendants began to ask questions and demand recognition. In recent decades, the tide has begun to turn. Descendants of Sea Sámi, many unaware of their heritage until adulthood, are now digging through archives, interviewing elders, and reviving coastal traditions once thought extinct. Sámi organizations, both local and international, are leading the charge. They host festivals, document oral histories, and lobby governments for recognition of Sea Sámi communities. In places like Tysfjord, Porsanger, and Alta, you can now find gatherings where traditional sea songs are sung, old boat-making techniques are taught, and children learn words their grandparents were once punished for saying. Art, music, and literature have become powerful tools for revival. Sea Sámi musicians blend joik, the traditional Sámi chant, with modern instruments. Writers tell stories of identity and reclamation, Young activists wear gakti proudly, not just on national days, but in everyday life. But the process is painful. Reclaiming a culture means confronting the systems that buried it. It means unpacking shame, loss, and generations of silence. Yet with every word spoken in Sámi, with every net tied the old way, the Sea Sámi proved they were never truly gone, just waiting, like low tide, for the right moment to return. Today, the Sea Sámi are navigating a new kind of coastline, the space between modern life and ancestral revival. Many still live in northern Norway and parts of Sweden and Finland, working as teachers, fishermen, artists, and scientists. Some have moved to cities. Others have returned to their villages. But recognition remains complicated. Norwegian authorities officially recognize the Sámi as an indigenous people with certain rights and cultural protections. But see, Sámi-specific rights are murkier. Their traditions don't always align with those of inland reindeer herders, leading to political and cultural friction. Some Sea Sámi communities still struggle with poverty, land access issues, and a legacy of trauma. Climate change has added new threats, changing fish patterns, harsher storms, and melting permafrost. Yet resilience runs deep. Schools now offer Sámi language courses. Youth groups teach old fishing techniques. Even social media plays a role, connecting diaspora communities across the globe, from Alaska to Minnesota to Oslo. The Sea Sámi are rewriting their story, not as victims, but as survivors. The Sea Sámi story does not end in Scandinavia. Their legacy extends across oceans, carried by those who left or were taken far from home. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, many Sámi people emigrated to North America, particularly to Minnesota, North Dakota, and Alaska. Some were fleeing poverty, others seeking new opportunities. Among them were Sea Sámi who brought fishing skills, boat-building knowledge, and a deep respect for the land. Their descendants live in the U.S. and Canada today, often unaware of their Sámi roots. But that, too, is changing. In places like Minnesota, genealogy groups and cultural societies are helping families trace their Sámi ancestry. Stories emerge of great-grandparents who spoke a strange language, who sang in minor keys, who never liked to talk about the old country. Meanwhile, in Alaska, a fascinating chapter links the Sámi and indigenous communities. In the late 1800s, Sámi reindeer herders, some of them Sea Sámi, were brought to help establish herding as a livelihood for Alaskan natives. Their knowledge laid the foundation for reindeer husbandry that still exists today. Through these threads, the Sea Sámi are connected to a global web of culture, memory, and revival. The story of the Sea Sámi is not one extinction, but of endurance. Against the cold, against silence, against force forgetting, they held on. Their traditions were passed quietly, in lullabies and gestures. Their knowledge lived in hands that mended nets or steered boats through fog. Their pride, once buried beneath shame, now rises again, stronger for having survived. Today, the Sea Sámi are teaching the world a lesson, that identity can be submerged but never drowned. That culture, like the tide, returns. If you listen closely to the wind above the fjords, or the waves breaking on a northern shore, you might still hear them. The Sea Sámi, life on the edge, voices from the deep. Dive deeper into the voices from the fjords. If this story moved you, don't let it be forgotten. Like this video, comment if you're a descendant or just learning. Subscribe for more stories history left behind. Help echo their legacy beyond the waves.